A few days before the grand tournament at Iredell Castle was set to begin, King Gregory traveled north to the city of Pisqueville to meet with one of his oldest allies, King Sessos. The tension across Teginia was growing stronger with every passing day. Fighters from every land were preparing for glory, gold, and the chance to claim the land of Lexington. Gregory wanted to make sure his allies were ready. Inside the halls of Pisqueville, King Gregory entered with his usual confidence and booming laughter. The massive king grinned beneath his crown as he asked the question that had been on his mind ever since the invitations were sent across Teginia. "Ha ha ha ha! Did you pick a fighter?" King Sessos stood calmly before him. Unlike Gregory, Sessos showed little excitement. The older ruler had seen too much war to celebrate so easily. His kingdom had suffered greatly during the tunnel battles, and the scars of the conflict still weighed heavily on his mind. Still, Sessos answered without hesitation. "Yes, Quan, the one who led my army." Quan was no ordinary knight. Across Pisqueville, his name carried respect among soldiers and nobles alike. He had survived some of the bloodiest fighting in Teginia and had become known as Sessos's greatest warrior. Choosing him for the tournament was not only a strategic move, it was a statement to the rest of the kingdoms that Pisqueville intended to compete seriously. King Gregory immediately burst into laughter and approval. "Ha, ha, ha! I like that language." Gregory believed power solved everything, and in his mind, strong fighters meant certain victory. Between Iredell's champions and Pisqueville's warriors, he became convinced the tournament would eventually fall into the hands of their alliance. To Gregory, the event was more than entertainment. It was another opportunity to tighten his control over Teginia and strengthen his influence over the surrounding kingdoms. Sessos quietly agreed. "We will win this." But even as he spoke, there was hesitation in his eyes. Sessos followed Gregory's leadership without question. Yet, somewhere beneath his loyalty lingered concern. Gregory's ambitions often led kingdoms into darkness, and many rulers throughout Teginia had already learned not to fully trust the king of Iredell. Gregory then leaned forward with a wide grin and raised thumb. "And remember what?" The room became still. Sessos answered with a single word: loyalty. That one word carried a deeper meaning than either king openly admitted. Gregory was not simply talking about support during the tournament. He was warning Sessos to remain obedient no matter what happened inside the arena. Rumors had already begun spreading that Gregory intended to manipulate the matches, influence fighters, and ensure the tournament benefited Iredell above all else. King Gregory could never truly be trusted. Yet King Sessos continued to follow his lead without resistance, binding Pisqueville even tighter to the growing shadow of Iredell as the tournament drew near. Only a few hours after returning from Pisqueville, King Gregory arrived back at Iredell Castle with the tournament still heavy on his mind. The massive stone halls of the castle were busier than ever as fighters, guards, servants, and messengers moved throughout the kingdom, preparing for the battles that would soon begin. Waiting within the castle was Knowles, the knight personally chosen by King Gregory to represent Iredell in the tournament. For years, Knowles had served as one of Gregory's most dependable warriors. Ever since the disappearance of Phillicent from Gregory's inner circle, Knowles had risen through the ranks and earned the king's trust. Strong, disciplined, and feared by many soldiers throughout Teginia, Knowles had become Gregory's new favorite champion. As Gregory entered the hall, he immediately addressed him with his usual demanding tone. "You need to train harder." Gregory wasted no time. with praise or celebration. He understood the tournament would attract dangerous fighters from every corner of Teginia. Warriors from Selsmire, Prasso, Arvedon, Amron, and beyond were already arriving at the castle gates. Gregory wanted complete dominance, and he expected Knowles to carry the reputation of Iredell with absolute focus. Knowles listened carefully. King Gregory stepped closer and reminded him again. "You need to be prepared." Gregory's words were not just motivation. They were pressure. The king wanted no distractions, no excuses, and no weakness. He feared humiliation more than anything, and losing the tournament in front of the kingdoms of Teginia would damage the image of Iredell. Gregory needed Knowles, sharp, loyal, and completely committed to victory. Without hesitation, Knowles agreed and immediately headed outside toward the castle training grounds. The courtyard of Iredell was alive with activity. Knights clashed swords, soldiers sparred with wooden weapons, and trainers barked orders beneath the grey stone towers of the fortress. Rumors about arriving fighters spread quickly among the guards. One soldier approached Knowles seriously. "I saw good fighters arriving at the castle." The warning lingered in the air. The knights of Iredell had already witnessed powerful warriors entering the kingdom, hardened mercenaries, tournament champions, brutal soldiers from war-torn lands, and ambitious fighters seeking gold and fame. Everyone understood. This tournament would not be easy, even for someone as experienced as Knowles. Some of the soldiers gave him advice. Others spoke about different fighting styles they had observed among the arriving competitors. A few even suggested he increase his training before the opening matches began. Knowles took every word seriously. As the evening darkened over Iredell Castle Park, Knowles trained harder than ever before. He swung his sword repeatedly against thick wooden posts until splinters exploded into the air. Sparks flashed from his blade as he practiced powerful strikes beneath the torchlight of the training grounds. The pressure surrounding the tournament only fueled him further. Finally, gripping his sword tightly, Knowles stared forward with complete confidence and declared, "I'm built for this." Unlike many of the nervous fighters arriving at Iredell, Knowles believed war and combat were part of his nature. He had spent years preparing for moments like this, and now the tournament would become his chance to prove to all of Teginia why King Gregory trusted him above everyone else. As the days slowly passed before the great tournament began, King Gregory continued tightening his control over the lands surrounding Iredell. While fighters trained inside the castle walls and travelers poured into Teginia from distant kingdoms, Gregory focused on something equally important to him: maintaining fear, loyalty, and influence over the people. Outside the walls of Iredell Castle, Gregory made his way toward the waters surrounding the kingdom, where his deadly crocodiles rested along the riverbanks. The giant reptiles immediately gathered around him. Unlike strangers or enemy soldiers, the crocodiles never attacked King Gregory. Over the years, Gregory had personally fed them, cared for their territory, and trained them to recognize his presence. The creatures viewed him almost as one of their own. Gregory proudly considered them one of Iredell's greatest defenses. He knelt beside them, confidently, while the beasts growled and snapped around his armored legs. "Crocs, do what I say." And it was true. At Gregory's command, the crocodiles could instantly turn violent against intruders trying to approach the castle waters. Many enemy scouts, thieves, and careless travelers had already disappeared beneath those waters over the years. Gregory enjoyed the fear the creatures created around Iredell because fear itself was another weapon he used to control Teginia. But Gregory did not rule through fear alone. As he walked through nearby towns and marketplaces, he occasionally tossed a few gold coins towards struggling families and poor villagers. Children rushed toward the coins, while older citizens praised the king for his generosity. To many common people, Gregory appeared powerful, protective, and charitable. But the truth was far different. The few coins Gregory handed out were almost meaningless compared to the enormous amounts of gold hidden deep inside Iredale Castle. Gregory hoarded wealth obsessively and guarded it with paranoia. His small acts of kindness were carefully calculated, just enough for people to spread stories claiming he was a good king who cared about his people. And many citizens believed it. Gregory understood psychology better than most rulers. He knew people were easier to control when they admired him instead of feared him completely. The illusion of generosity helped disguise the greed and cruelty hiding beneath his smiling face. Later that evening, Gregory finally returned to Iredale Castle, where several guards stood waiting inside the hall with urgent expressions. The king immediately noticed the tension and sat forward in his throne. "What is it?" The guards revealed they had finally uncovered information about Gregory's missing niece. For a moment, Gregory's eyes sharpened with excitement. Ever since the Iredale War, Gregory had been searching for her relentlessly. During the chaos of the conflict, she had vanished from the kingdom after Gregory imprisoned her parents, including his own brother. That single act revealed how ruthless Gregory truly was. According to the rumors spreading through Iredale, Gregory's brother had secretly stolen gold from the royal treasury behind the king's back. Gregory considered the betrayal unforgivable. No matter who committed the crime, enemy, ally, or even blood family, Gregory would punish them without mercy if gold was involved. His brother was thrown into prison. But during the confusion of the war, Gregory's niece escaped the kingdom, carrying some of the stolen gold with her. Since then, Gregory had treated her disappearance as both a personal insult and unfinished business. The guards explained what they had learned. "Your niece is hiding on an island somewhere." Far north of Taginia existed a scattered chain of distant islands surrounded by rough waters and long travel routes. Reaching them required taking large transport floats across dangerous seas far from the mainland kingdoms. Gregory slowly smiled. This was the first real lead he had received in a long time. "I will go to the islands after the tournament." The king's voice carried complete confidence, but there was something darker hidden beneath it. Nobody truly knew what Gregory planned to do if he found his niece. Some feared he would imprison her like her parents. Others believed he simply wanted the stolen gold returned. But with King Gregory, mercy was always uncertain. As the guards stood silently before him, Gregory's wide grin returned once more. "This is good news!" And somewhere far beyond the northern waters of Taginia, his missing niece remained unaware that the king of Iredale was already preparing to come for her once the tournament ended. Meanwhile, far north in the frozen lands of Arcta, Strike continued wandering through the brutal snowfall alone. The deeper he traveled into the icy wilderness, the more uncertain his future became. Snow whipped violently across the mountains and woods, while freezing winds battered against his armor with relentless force. But the truth was, Strike no longer even knew where he was going. Ever since the collapse of the tunnel invasion and the victories of Iredale, Strike had been running from kingdom to kingdom, trying to stay alive. As the former Srock soldier who betrayed his own people by giving tunnel maps and information to Selsmire, Royswood, and Wallington, he knew exactly what awaited him if Gregory's forces ever captured him: the dungeons of Iredale, and perhaps something even worse. So, Strike kept moving north. With every mile, he drifted farther away from Taginia and closer toward the dangerous region known as Death Falls, a dark, magical territory feared even by experienced travelers. Many stories claimed entire groups vanished there and monstrous creatures hide deep within forests. Strike may have already been considering leaving Taginia forever, but survival itself was becoming harder by the hour. The cold was destroying him. His breathing had become rough and uneven as snow gathered along his armor and shoulders. His hands trembled from exhaustion, while his legs dragged through the deep snow. Yesterday, he had managed to find temporary shelter, but now he had wandered much farther into the remote wilderness, where the forests thickened and the storms grew more violent. Strike looked around nervously. "I'm going to die out here." The realization felt more real with every passing minute. The woods of Arcta were filled with dangerous animals, starving wolves, massive bears, and creatures far worse that travelers rarely survived encountering. Strike knew nightfall would only make the situation deadlier. Still, he forced himself onward. "I need shelter." As he pushed through the blizzard, his thoughts drifted back toward the man he blamed for everything. Gregory. Hatred burned in his mind, stronger than the cold around him. Strike believed the war could have ended differently. He believed Gregory's greed, manipulation, and overwhelming power destroyed any hope of victory for the resistance forces. Now, countless soldiers were dead, cities were broken, and survivors like Strike were scattered across Taginia, hiding like criminals. If Gregory had lost the war, Strike would not be wandering frozen wastelands fighting for survival. Now, he felt completely alone. "Dangerous animals roam around here." His hand tightened near his weapon as the wind howled louder through the trees. Strike truly believed this journey might be the end for him. Then suddenly, through the storm, he noticed something faint in the distance. A light. Strike stopped immediately and stared through the snowfall. "I see light." Far ahead stood a tiny cabin, barely visible between the snow-covered trees. Warm, yellow light glowed through one of the windows, proving someone was inside. For the first time in hours, hope returned to him. The cabin looked small and isolated, but to Strike it might as well have been a palace. Whether friend or stranger waited inside did not matter anymore. Without shelter, he would never survive the night. Slowly, exhausted and freezing, Strike began walking toward the cabin as the storm raged behind him. Taking you back a few days before the fighting tournament, deep in the farming lands of Ebenwich and neighboring Arvedon. The fields stretched endlessly beneath the warm sun. Wheat danced in the wind, while animals and townsfolk worked side by side from sunrise to sunset. These were not rich kingdoms built on castles or armies. Their strength came from the land itself. Food, livestock, lumber, and hard labor kept both towns alive and powerful. Every person and animal in Ebonwich and Arvedon believed in the same thing: survive together, build together, and if needed, fight together. Leading Ebonwich was Farmer Bill, a stern old farmer known more for his wisdom than violence. Bill had no interest in war, conquest, or glory. Unlike many rulers across Taginia, he never marched beside King Gregory and never sent armies into battle. Bill believed farms should feed people, not burn, because of politics. The farmland was too valuable to risk. Without it, both Ebonwich and Arvedon would collapse. Still, Farmer Bill was no fool. He understood King Gregory's hunger for power and gold. Rather than openly oppose him, Bill made deals with him instead. Crops, livestock, and resources were traded for gold, and both sides benefited from the arrangement. Gregory accepted the agreement because he believed the farming towns posed no threat to his empire. But the truth was, something Gregory never fully understood: Ebenwich and Arvedon did not fear him. They simply chose peace over conflict, and the farm animals living there were far more dangerous than outsiders realized. One afternoon, Farmer Bill worked alone, stacking hay beneath the clear skies of Ebonwich. His face looked tired and irritated from a long day of labor. While lifting a bundle of hay, an annoying but familiar voice interrupted him. "Working hard, chum." Bill slowly turned his head as Winston Hops approached with his usual smug grin. Winston was a loud-mouthed rabbit boxer known throughout the farmland towns for his sarcasm and constant joking. He wore red boxing gloves, walked with confidence, and always acted like the world was one big joke. Farmer Bill clearly was not amused. But Bill had something important in his hand, an invitation from King Gregory himself. The fighting tournament was approaching fast, and Gregory demanded representatives from across Teginia. Bill hated the idea of participating in such violence, but refusing Gregory outright could create unnecessary problems for Ebonwich and Arvidon. So Bill had to choose someone. And against his better judgment, he chose Winston Hops. Bill handed over the tournament invite without saying much. Winston stared at it for a second in complete shock before his face lit up with excitement. "You got an invite to fight?" The rabbit laughed loudly, almost unable to believe it himself. Winston immediately started joking around, acting foolish instead of serious. Farmer Bill watched him carefully, already beginning to regret the decision. Maybe Winston was too immature. Maybe he wouldn't take the tournament seriously enough. Bill could already feel the headache coming. "I might regret this decision," Bill muttered to himself, while Winston continued grinning like an idiot. But what many people failed to understand was this: Winston Hops was no joke. Behind the sarcasm and foolish behavior was one of the most dangerous fighters in the farming lands. Winston was a famous boxer who had won numerous fighting titles across smaller tournaments and underground arenas. His punches could crack jaws instantly. His kicks hit hard enough to knock larger opponents flat to the ground. And because he was a rabbit, Winston possessed unbelievable speed and agility. He could hop, dodge, and move faster than most fighters could react. And that wasn't all. Winston also carried a dangerous yellow taser, specially built to shock opponents during combat. He was unpredictable, fast, tough, and far stronger than he looked. As Winston waved goodbye and walked away with the invitation, he shouted one last sarcastic remark over his shoulder. "See ya, don't break a leg." Farmer Bill watched him leave with a worried expression, wondering if he had just made the worst decision possible, or perhaps the smartest one. Because if Winston Hops truly focused and fought seriously, the rest of the tournament fighters better be careful. This rabbit might actually be strong enough to win the entire tournament. Winston Hops storms around the farms of Ebonwich like he already won the tournament before it even started. The loudmouth rabbit punches trees with his boxing gloves, yelling and bragging to every rabbit nearby that King Gregory picked him because he is the toughest rabbit alive. Dust flies from the bark every time Winston swings his fists into the trees, while the other farm rabbits stare at him with blank faces. Nobody really takes Winston seriously. They know he can fight, but they also know he acts foolish half the time. Still, Winston keeps hyping himself up anyway, waving the tournament invite around like it is already proof he is a champion. Winston's biggest problem is his focus. 1 second, he is talking about beating fighters and taking Lexington, and the next second, he is daydreaming about roasted chicken, cheese, broccoli, and carrots. Food constantly distracts him. The other rabbits shake their heads, watching Winston completely lose track of what he was saying. Winston Hops loves food, more than almost anything. He wakes up thinking about meals and spends half his time gathering snacks around the farms. Deep down, even the rabbits know Winston could become dangerous if he ever learned discipline. He's naturally strong, quick, and fearless, but his goofy behavior ruins his chances over and over again. Winston does not care what anybody thinks. He sarcastically laughs at the doubters, jokes around with the other farm animals, and keeps yelling that rabbits will flood Lexington once he wins the Golden Land Prize. He proudly shows off his taser, claiming it gives him enough time to stomp out anybody standing in his way. With his invite tucked safely inside his pocket, Winston finally leaves Ebonwich and rushes through the forests toward Iredell Castle. He wants to arrive before most of the fighters, unaware that several warriors already reached the castle long before him. The woods stay calm during most of the trip. Winston moves quickly through the rivers and forests without trouble, convinced the journey will be easy. But then he notices movement in the water ahead. Long green shapes begin floating through the river. Crocodiles. Winston suddenly realizes he must be close to Iredell because King Gregory released crocodiles around the castle grounds to test the fighters arriving for the tournament. Winston stares at the reptiles in shock before blurting out, "Green guys!" Instead of backing away carefully, Winston instantly pulls out his taser and starts firing electricity into the water. Sparks explode around the crocodiles while Winston grins confidently, expecting them to retreat. But the taser barely slows them down. If anything, the shocks only make them angrier. The crocodiles snap wildly through the water, hissing and splashing toward Winston with glowing eyes and open jaws. Now Winston panics. He swings punches while firing the taser again and again, but more crocodiles appear from deeper in the river. Water erupts everywhere as the reptiles rush him from every direction. Winston tries shoving them away while stumbling through the river, screaming in frustration. The taser no longer looks impressive at all. The crocodiles keep charging forward like monsters that cannot feel pain. For the first time since leaving Ebonwich, Winston Hops looks terrified. Knowing he cannot win, Winston finally runs for his life. He scrambles toward a giant tree while crocodiles chase him through the mud and shallow water. Winston barely escapes their jaws before climbing high into the branches. Below him, the crocodiles circle the tree, snapping and growling, but they cannot climb. Winston hugs the tree tightly while catching his breath, trying to calm himself down. So the loud rabbit waits. Minutes pass while Winston hides among the branches, relaxing and recovering. Eventually, the crocodiles lose interest and slowly wander back into the river and surrounding forest. Winston carefully peeks down from the tree and sees the coast is finally clear. Without wasting another second, he jumps down and sprints through the woods again. At last, Winston reaches the river bank overlooking Iredell Castle. The massive castle rises across the water while the sunset glows behind it. Winston stares at the towers while gripping his taser tightly. The crocodiles embarrassed him badly, and deep down, he knows his weapon was useless against them. Most other fighters handled Gregory's crocodile test without much trouble. Maybe Winston truly is not ready for a tournament filled with the strongest warriors in Teginia. But Winston refuses to admit defeat. No crocodile is going to convince him he is weak. No fighter is going to stop him from trying to win the gold, the land, and the glory waiting inside Iredell Castle. Winston Hops waited long enough outside the dangerous waters of Iredell to avoid getting ripped apart by the crocodiles. Other fighters battled the beasts to prove themselves immediately, but Winston's taser made things harder for him. After carefully slipping through the area at the right moment, Winston finally marched toward the giant front doors of Iredell Castle with confidence written all over his face. A lone guard stood near the entrance, gripping his spear while staring at the massive rabbit approaching the castle. Winston was much bigger than an average farm rabbit, and the guard could not understand why this strange creature was storming toward the castle with such confidence. Before the guard could even react properly, Winston suddenly started sprinting directly at the doors while waving his taser high in the air. "Out of my way!" Winston shouted loudly. The guard nearly panicked. His eyes widened underneath his helmet as he instantly reached for his weapons. For a brief moment, he honestly believed the rabbit was charging him. Winston came running so aggressively that the guard prepared himself for a fight right there at the castle entrance. But just before reaching him, Winston suddenly stopped, grinned, and burst out laughing. "Hey, just joking," Winston said while lowering the taser. The guard stood there awkwardly for a moment before laughing as well. Though the laugh was forced, Winston clearly made him uncomfortable. The rabbit was enormous, loud, and acted like a fool, but at least he did not seem dangerous anymore. Winston apologized and explained he was only trying to have some fun. He told the guard he liked joking around and messing with people sometimes. The guard nodded while still wondering what kind of lunatic had just arrived at the castle. Winston then proudly pulled out his tournament invitation and showed it to the guard. That finally explained everything. The guard smirked and immediately pointed toward the inside of the castle. "Well, it cost 2 silver coins to stay here," the guard said. "And this isn't a joke." Winston frowned immediately. He could tell the guard was trying to get clever with him now, but Winston did not laugh back. Still, he dug through his pouch and handed over the 2 silver coins anyway. Deep down, he already expected King Gregory to charge the fighters for something. Gregory's greed was legendary across Teginia. Winston shook his head and muttered to himself, "At least the king is predictable." The guard escorted Winston through the halls of Iredell Castle and eventually brought him to a small fighter's room. It was simple, cramped, and nothing luxurious at all. A few favored warriors had much better rooms, but Winston honestly did not care. Compared to sleeping in dirt holes and farms outside Ebonwich, this place felt like a vacation resort to him. Once alone, Winston wandered around the room curiously until he noticed a large mirror standing near the wall. He stopped and stared at his reflection proudly. Winston admired his size, his boxing glove, and the taser hanging at his side. He smirked at himself. "Looks like a winner." Even after struggling against the crocodiles earlier, Winston still believed he could win the entire tournament. His confidence refused to disappear. Winston knew he was strong. His boxing alone could flatten most opponents. The problem was never his power. The problem was Winston himself. Some days he focused like a champion. Other days his brain wandered toward food, jokes, or random nonsense in the middle of serious situations. Nobody truly knew which version of Winston Hops would show up in the arena. Still, Winston puffed out his chest confidently and bragged to himself again. "I'm guaranteed to win this." Just then, loud knocking echoed against the door. "Knock, knock!" Winston opened the door to find another castle guard standing outside. The guard calmly informed Winston that King Gregory would allow every fighter 2 free meal portions before tomorrow's matches. Winston's eyes widened with excitement. 2 portions. Now that sounded like respect. "Good!" Winston shouted proudly. "The king knows I eat 2 portions." The guard simply stared at him in silence before slowly shaking his head and walking away down the hallway. Winston stood there, grinning while already imagining all the food he could order. Meat, pies, bread, fruit, soup. His mind raced from one meal to another. Food always distracted him, no matter how serious things became. Eventually, Winston yawned heavily and climbed into bed. The rabbit pulled the blanket over himself and stared toward the dark ceiling for a moment. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the tournament. Tomorrow, he would finally prove everyone wrong. And just because he struggled against the crocodiles did not mean he was a loser yet. Meanwhile, several days before King Gregory's grand tournament was set to begin, life in the city of Pisqueville looked far different from the chaos brewing across the rest of Tegenia. Pisqueville was a city built upon discipline, loyalty, and military pride. Purple banners waved across the streets while armored knights marched through the city under the command of one feared and respected warrior. His name was Quan. Quan was not just another knight serving King Sessos. He was the king's greatest fighter and most trusted commander. In many ways, Quan acted as the second ruler of Pisqueville whenever Sessos focused on diplomacy or war planning. Soldiers listened to Quan the same way they listened to the king himself. His reputation alone was enough to command respect from nearly every fighter in the region. The dark armor Quan wore was legendary throughout Tegenia. Thick purple steel plated his body from head to toe, while a massive shield bearing the crest of Pisqueville rested at his side. The armor itself was crafted from some of the strongest metals the kingdom could afford, heavy enough to withstand brutal attacks, yet balanced enough for Quan to move quickly in combat. And speed was exactly what made him terrifying. Quan fought with deadly precision. His sword strikes were fast, direct, and merciless. Many opponents never even realized they had lost until Quan's blade was already resting at their throat. He did not waste movement. He did not fight emotionally. Every swing had purpose. Every step was calculated. That same discipline was exactly why King Sessos trusted him more than almost anyone else in Pisqueville. Quan treated the defense of the kingdom as his life's purpose, while other soldiers rested in taverns or bragged about victories. Quan spent most of his days training the knights under his command. The training grounds of Pisqueville constantly echoed with the sound of steel crashing together as Quan drilled soldiers from sunrise to sunset. He pushed the fighters hard, sometimes harder than they wanted. Quan believed hesitation got people killed. Weak focus got kingdoms destroyed. "Again!" Quan shouted while watching two young knights spar in the dirt. The exhausted soldiers tightened their grip on their swords and continued training. "Eye sharp! Stay focused!" Quan barked again. Some knights struggled to keep up with his harsh methods, but nobody could deny the results. Pisqueville's soldiers became stronger under Quan's leadership. Faster, more alert, more disciplined. The fighters respected him because he never asked them to do anything he could not do himself. King Quan trained harder than everyone around him, and he had already proven himself many times in real battle. During the Great War surrounding Iredell, Quan became one of the key commanders, fighting alongside King Gregory's alliance. While the rats of Jacques attempted to overwhelm Iredell through raids and surprise attacks, Quan studied their movements carefully. He realized the rats were growing too confident while attacking Gregory's territory. Instead of simply defending, Quan came up with a dangerous strategy. He proposed flanking the rats by attacking Jacques itself. While the rat armies Focused on invading Iredell, Quan led forces directly toward their homeland. The attack caught Jacques completely off guard. Chaos erupted throughout the Rat City as Quan and the Pisqueville Knights stormed through the streets, cutting down enemy fighters with ruthless efficiency. Quan's tactics shattered the Rats' momentum during the war. What began as an invasion against Gregory suddenly turned into panic for Jacques as they scrambled to defend their own territory. Quan became one of the major reasons the Rat forces collapsed during several battles. When the surviving Pisqueville soldiers eventually returned home from war, crowds filled the streets cheering loudly for Quan. Knights lifted their weapons into the air while citizens shouted his name proudly. "That's our Quan!" many yelled throughout the city. "Lead us to victory!" To the people of Pisqueville, Quan was more than a commander. He was a symbol of strength and survival, a warrior who defended Tagania when others feared collapse. Even King Seisos openly praised Quan for his loyalty and intelligence during battle, and the war against Jacques was far from the only victory on Quan's record. His armor carried scars from countless conflicts across Tagania, bandit raids, border skirmishes, castle defenses, and full-scale battles had all shaped him into the hardened warrior he had become. Time after time, Quan stood at the front lines, protecting Pisqueville from destruction. That was why King Seisos trusted him completely. And now, with Gregory's tournament approaching, many throughout Tagania quietly wondered something important. If Quan entered the tournament himself, who in the world could actually stop him? After another exhausting day of training the soldiers of Pisqueville, Quan finally allowed himself a moment of peace. The clang of swords still echoed behind him from the training yard as knights continued practicing the lessons he drilled into them all afternoon. Dust and sweat covered the streets while the purple banners of Pisqueville waved proudly above the stone buildings. Quan sheathed his sword and quietly made his way toward the great Feinald castle where King Seisos ruled. It had become something of a routine between them. Every so often after training, Quan would visit the king for dinner or conversation regarding the kingdom's defenses, though Quan rarely spoke more than necessary. King Seisos always valued his presence. To the aging king, Quan was not simply another commander. He was the greatest protector Pisqueville had ever produced. Quan entered the castle halls confidently, his heavy armor echoing against the stone floors. The throne room stood mostly silent, except for the crackling of torches. Quan looked toward the throne and called out firmly, "King Seisos!" For a brief moment, there was no answer. Then, suddenly, the elderly king stepped out from behind the throne, smiling warmly beneath his golden crown. He had clearly been expecting Quan already. "I am honored to be your king," Seisos said sincerely. And he truly meant those words. Many rulers throughout Tagania had soldiers, but very few had someone as loyal and capable as Quan. Seisos viewed him almost as a blessing sent to protect Pisqueville itself. The king trusted Quan with nearly everything concerning defense and warfare. If Pisqueville survived difficult times, it was often because Quan stood at the front lines, refusing to fall. The old king slowly approached him while leaning upon his staff, before suddenly shouting proudly for everyone nearby to hear. "The chosen one!" The guards inside the hall glanced toward Quan immediately. They all understood exactly who the king meant. If any fighter from Piskville could bring glory to the kingdom at Gregory's tournament, it would be Quan. Quan smirked slightly underneath the cloth covering part of his face. He already suspected why the king had called him here. Rumors about the Iredale tournament had spread across Taginia for weeks. Fighters everywhere hoped for gold, glory, or land, and many people in Piskville already assumed Quan would be chosen to compete. King Tsesos pointed directly at him. "I need you to fight in the Iredale tournament." Exactly what Quan expected to hear. Without hesitation, Quan nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." Deep down, Quan believed he could win the tournament himself. His armor alone gave him advantages most fighters could not handle, heavy enough to absorb devastating attacks, yet forged carefully enough not to slow him down too much. Combined with his skill and discipline, Quan was one of the most dangerous warriors in all of Taginia. Then King Tsesos revealed something even more important. "If you win," the king explained, "you'll receive gold and the land of Lexington." Quan's eyes narrowed slightly with interest. Lexington was a valuable territory, a neighboring land with opportunities for leadership, power, and expansion. But Tsesos continued further, making the offer even greater. "I will let you lead the land of Lexington." Now that changed everything. This was not just about tournament glory anymore. This was a chance for Quan to become ruler of his own territory while still standing beside Piskville. It was the perfect opportunity for a warrior like him. Quan understood immediately how valuable such a reward could become in the future. The two shook hands in agreement. Before Quan departed the castle, carrying his tournament invitation with him. As he walked back through the streets of Piskville, other fighters and townspeople stopped to speak with him. Some already guessed the news by the expression on his face alone. Quan calmly informed them he would indeed be fighting in Gregory's tournament. The reactions spread quickly throughout the city. Many soldiers looked relieved, knowing Piskville would be represented by its strongest warrior. Others became excited, imagining Quan crushing fighters from across Taginia. Night slowly settled over the city by the time Quan neared his home. Moonlight reflected softly against the dark purple steel of his armor while the streets grew quieter. Most people had already returned indoors for the evening. Then suddenly, he heard shouting nearby. A frightened woman cried out somewhere down a nearby alley. Quan instantly turned toward the sound and rushed forward without hesitation. As he rounded the corner, he spotted a woman collapsed against the stone road, breathing heavily in fear. She looked shaken and injured, as though someone had attacked her moments earlier. Quan immediately knelt beside her and carefully helped her back to her feet. "That must have hurt," he said calmly, while steadying her. The woman thanked him quietly, still frightened, and Quan's expression hardened as he looked around the dark street. "Who did this to you?" he asked. The woman pointed shakily farther down the road toward the rear gate area near Iredale's connected trade entrance. In the distance, several small figures could be seen disappearing into the shadows. "Rats!" she whispered fearfully. Quan's eyes narrowed immediately. "Rats!" he growled angrily. Hatred for the rats of Jark still burned deeply inside him after everything that happened during the war. Many criminal rat gangs wandered throughout parts of Taginia, stealing valuables, attacking travelers, or harassing innocent people before escaping into tunnels and alleyways. Quan recognized the situation immediately. The rats had likely tried robbing or dragging the woman away before fleeing once others approached nearby. Quan considered chasing after them for only a brief moment, but the criminals already had too much distance ahead. Catching them through the maze-like streets at night would be nearly impossible now. Instead, Quan focused on the more important matter standing beside him. The woman was still frightened and struggling to stand properly. Quan decided the rats could escape tonight. Protecting the innocent came first. Without another word, the armored commander slowly escorted the woman safely through the dark streets to ensure she made it home unharmed. Later that same night, after helping the frightened woman safely return home, Quan finally made his way toward the quiet area behind Finold Castle, near his own residence. The moon hung high above Piskville, while torchlight flickered softly against the stone walls of the kingdom. Quan expected the night to finally be over, but just as he approached his home, he suddenly heard a familiar voice calling out to him from the darkness. "Quan!" Quan turned immediately and saw King Quesos slowly stepping out from a small doorway near the rear side of the castle grounds. The elderly king leaned on his staff while his royal purple robes dragged lightly against the stone path. Even this, late at night, Quesos looked serious. Quan could tell immediately this was not just another casual conversation. The king approached him carefully before speaking in a calm but firm voice. "This tournament will be your greatest task." Quan stood silently listening while the old king explained just how important Gregory's tournament truly was. This was not simply entertainment for Teginia. The event would shape alliances, reputations, and future power between kingdoms. Quesos wanted Quan to understand the weight resting upon his shoulders before departing for Iredell. King Quesos reminded him that King Gregory himself specifically expected Quan to arrive. Gregory had heard countless stories about Piskville's greatest commander during the war. He knew exactly who Quan was and clearly wanted him participating in the tournament. "King Gregory will be expecting you," Quesos said seriously. The king explained further that Gregory intended to treat Quan with special respect once he arrived at Iredell Castle. A prepared room already waited for him. Gregory would likely try to keep Quan comfortable and confident before the tournament began. In many ways, Gregory hoped Quan would fight well and bring prestige to the alliance between Iredell and Piskville. Quesos made one thing especially clear. Quan needed to respect Gregory's wishes once he arrived. Gregory was powerful, dangerous, and deeply political. Even allies had to be careful around him. Quan nodded calmly, understanding every word. He already expected Gregory to play games behind the scenes during the tournament. But that did not bother him. Quan cared only about victory. The two warriors shook hands firmly underneath the moonlight. "Good luck," King Quesos told him. And with that, Quan finally departed for Iredell Castle. However, the journey from Piskville to Iredell was extremely long. Traveling on foot through forests, rivers, and dangerous territory could take days. Quan decided it would be smarter to travel part of the distance by vehicle instead. He soon located a transport wagon preparing for travel and stepped toward the driver confidently. "Take me to Iredell Castle," Quan ordered. The driver recognized the famous armor immediately and wasted no time arguing. Quan climbed into the back while the vehicle roared forward into the night. For hours, the wagon traveled across the rough roads of Teginia while Quan rested quietly in the back seat. Unlike most travelers, the long trip did not bother him at all. He slept nearly the entire ride while the drivers continued pushing onward through the darkness. By morning, sunlight slowly crept through the forest trees as the vehicle suddenly came to a halt. The drivers shouted for Quan to wake up. Ahead of them, the road completely disappeared beneath flooding water and swamp terrain. The closer travelers got to Iredell Castle, the more dangerous the environment became. Rivers, marshes, forests, and deep water surrounded Gregory's territory naturally, making invasion difficult. "We'll never get through this," one of the drivers muttered while staring ahead nervously. Quan stepped from the vehicle and looked toward the distant forest calmly. He could already sense the castle was close. Walking the remaining distance meant nothing to him. He thanked the drivers briefly before continuing alone through the woods. The wagon immediately turned around and departed back towards safer roads. Quan moved silently through the forest streams with sword and shield in hand while water splashed against his heavy armor. The woods around Iredell felt strangely quiet at first, too quiet. Then the noises began. Bushes rustled nearby. Water bubbled strangely beneath the surface. Something large moved between the trees. Quan stopped walking instantly. A crocodile suddenly burst from the swamp water with jaws wide open. Almost immediately, two more creatures followed from different directions, surrounding him within the flooded forest. Most travelers would have panicked. Quan did not even flinch. The commander drew his sword calmly as the crocodiles lunged toward him. Steel flashed through the air with brutal speed. One crocodile screamed as Quan's blade slashed across its body and hurled it back into the water. Another rushed from the side, only for Quan's shield to smash directly into its skull before his sword cut downward violently. Water exploded everywhere as Quan moved through the swamp like a machine built for war. The crocodiles quickly realized they had attacked the wrong man. Quan's strikes were ruthless and efficient. Every movement carried lethal precision. Several crocodiles retreated deeper into the swamp after witnessing the slaughter around them. Others floated lifelessly through the dark water after only moments of battle. Quan barely breathed harder afterward. To him, the entire fight felt easy. Without even bothering to clean his sword immediately, he simply continued walking toward the castle as if nothing had happened. Eventually, the massive towers of Iredell Castle appeared ahead through the trees. Two guards stood watch near the entrance gates. The moment they saw Quan's legendary purple armor, both guards straightened themselves immediately. "Welcome," they greeted proudly. King Gregory had already informed them that one of Piskville's greatest warriors would soon arrive for the tournament. The guards had fought alongside Piskville during the war and instantly recognized the commander standing before them. "The king has been waiting for you," one guard explained respectfully. Quan shook both of their hands firmly and even complimented them for their service during the war defending Iredell. The guards appreciated the respect greatly. Unlike many commanders, Quan actually remembered the soldiers who fought beside him. The guards escorted him through the enormous hallways of Iredell Castle before finally stopping near a private room deep within the castle corridors. "This room is yours for the night," they informed him. As Quan approached the doorway, he noticed something unexpected. Standing quietly near the entrance was a beautiful woman dressed in elegant purple clothing, matching the colors of Piskville itself. She smiled softly while motioning toward the room. "Follow me," she said gently. Quan immediately understood what Gregory was doing. King Gregory was already trying to make him comfortable before the tournament even began. A luxurious room, special treatment, and now beautiful company for the evening. Gregory clearly wanted Quan relaxed, confident, and loyal, heading into the battles ahead. Quan smirked quietly to himself. For once, even he had to admit, Gregory knew exactly how to treat an important fighter. Still wearing his armor, Quan followed the woman inside the room while smiling slightly, already preparing himself mentally for tomorrow's tournament.
Speech by Quan. I was not made to stand behind weaker men. I was built for war. Every battle, every scar, every victory. That is what shaped me into who I am. Pisqueville chose correctly. King Chisos calls me his chosen warrior because he already knows the truth. No fighter in this tournament has endured what I have. I trained knights while others slept. I defended kingdoms while other commanders hid behind walls. I crushed the rats of Jacques while Gregory's soldiers struggled to survive. And now all of Teginia gathers here to watch fighters pretend they belong beside me. They do not. This armor alone is worth more than most of these warriors. Every piece forged for battle, every mark earned through victory. And Lexington, that land should belong to someone strong enough to hold it. A king cannot hesitate. A king cannot fear war. A king must command respect the moment he enters a room. I already do. When I enter Gregory's tournament, they will see it immediately. The way I walk, the way I fight, the way soldiers lower their heads when they look at me. They will understand that Lexington already has its future king standing in this castle tonight. I am not traveling to this tournament hoping to win. I came here expecting it. For Pisqueville,
Several days before Gregory's grand tournament began in Iredell, another powerful warrior prepared himself far away from the shining castles and royal celebrations. Deep within the hardened town of Wallington lived a feared knight named Philip. Wallington's was not like the other cities of Teginia. It was darker, rougher, and constantly scarred by conflict. The people there believed in freedom above comfort. They distrusted powerful rulers and especially hated the idea of kings controlling their lives through fear or gold. Even with King Gregory expanding his influence across Teginia, Wallington refused to kneel before Iredell. The town had survived invasion after invasion throughout its history. Fires had consumed its streets, armies had marched against its walls countless times, yet somehow Wallington always stood back up again stronger than before. The people there were survivors, fighters, hardened souls who understood suffering better than luxury. Among all of Wallington's warriors, none were respected more than Philip. Mayor Smittler trusted him above every other soldier in town. Philip was considered one of the greatest knights Wallington had ever produced. He carried himself like a living weapon, tall, intimidating, and completely fearless in battle. A long sword constantly rested at his side, and rumors claimed he could cut through entire groups of soldiers before most fighters even reacted. Philip's speed alone frightened people. On the battlefield, he moved like a storm, crashing through enemy lines. Soldiers often described him as impossible to keep up with. One moment he stood beside his troops, the next he was already charging straight into enemy forces, screaming for Wallington to attack. "Charge!" Philip would roar while leading the front lines himself, and the terrifying part was he survived nearly every time. Many soldiers throughout Teginia questioned whether Philip was even human anymore. He rarely slept. He ignored pain. He never hesitated once battle began. His discipline bordered on madness. Some younger fighters whispered stories claiming Philip could march for days without rest while still fighting better than fully rested men. But Philip had not become this way naturally. Long ago, during one of Wallington's brutal wars against the blobs of Cord, Philip suffered a devastating injury. During a massive battle, he fought a monstrous blob warrior nearly twice his size. Philip eventually won the duel, but the creature permanently destroyed one of his eyes before dying. Since that day, Philip wore a black eye patch across the damaged eye. Instead of weakening him, the injury only hardened him further. The people of Wallington saw him as proof that pain could not stop true warriors, and Philip defended the town many times after that battle. History itself proved his loyalty. Whenever enemies attacked Wallington, Philip stood among the first soldiers, rushing toward danger instead of away from it. But one mission in particular showed exactly what kind of man Philip truly was. Far beyond the safer roads of Taginia existed a cursed forest region known as Death Falls, and the woods carried a terrifying reputation. Travelers vanished there constantly. Strange noises echoed through the fog-covered trees at night. Entire patrol groups disappeared without explanation. Some claimed creatures lived there. Others believed witches, curses, or ancient monsters haunted the forest. Whatever the truth was, Death Falls terrified nearly everyone. One day, several soldiers gathered near the entrance of the woods, preparing for an expedition. Philip arrived fully armed and stared directly into the fog-covered forest, while the other soldiers nervously whispered among themselves. "You need courage to go inside Death Falls," Philip told them firmly. He looked directly at the soldiers standing nearby. "You in?" he asked. The men hesitated immediately. Though many originally bragged about entering Death Falls, standing before the actual woods was different. The atmosphere alone felt wrong. Thick fog drifted through the dead trees while unnatural silence filled the air. Philip could already see fear spreading through the soldiers. One man finally shook his head nervously. "It's too dangerous, sir." Another soldier muttered quietly that they would die out there if they entered. Others slowly began backing away from the woods entirely. Philip stared at them silently for a moment. Deep down, he understood their fear completely. Death Falls was dangerous, perhaps more dangerous than most battlefields. Even Philip himself did not fully understand what lurked beyond those trees, but that mystery was exactly why somebody needed to investigate it eventually. Strange problems across Taginia often traced back toward Death Falls somehow. Philip tightened his grip around his sword and looked once more toward the dark forest. "Courage," he muttered quietly to himself. He believed courage was the only thing capable of overcoming places like Death Falls. Not strength, not numbers, courage. Still, Philip was not stupid enough to march into the cursed woods completely alone. Even he understood there was a difference between bravery and foolishness. Without reliable men willing to enter beside him, the mission could not happen properly. So Philip finally turned away from the forest and walked back toward Wallington, with the other soldiers trailing behind him. The mystery of Death Falls would remain unsolved for now. But one thing became clear that day. If anyone in Taginia possessed the courage to one day enter those cursed woods and survive, it was probably Philip. Meanwhile, back in the rough streets of Wallington, Mayor Smittler walked proudly through the town, greeting his people one by one. Unlike many leaders across Taginia, Smittler did not hide inside castles, behind guards and luxury. He preferred walking directly among the citizens who fought and suffered beside him through every invasion and every war. The people respected him because of that. As he moved through the crowded streets, Smittler waved toward merchants, soldiers, and families rebuilding damaged homes from past conflicts. "Hello!" he shouted cheerfully, while several townspeople greeted him back warmly. But despite the smiles, Smittler was clearly searching for someone. "Where is Philip?" he asked repeatedly while pointing around the streets. Some citizens shrugged and admitted they had not seen the eye-patched knight today. Others mentioned Philip was likely somewhere training again. That answer honestly did not surprise the mayor very much. Philip practically trained more than he rested. Eventually, Smittler finally spotted him walking through town, wearing the familiar red Wallington uniform and black fur hat. The eye patch across Philip's face instantly made him stand out among the crowd. "Philip, good to see you," Smittler greeted proudly. And Philip smirked slightly. "Likewise, Smittler. The usual troubles, I presume?" The two immediately began joking with one another, the way old comrades often did after years of surviving war together. Despite Philip's intimidating appearance and brutal reputation, he actually respected Mayor Smittler greatly. The mayor trusted Philip more than any other fighter in Wallington, and Philip knew it. Soon, both men burst into laughter while shaking hands in the middle of town. Nearby citizens smiled, seeing the two strongest leaders of Wallington getting along so naturally. Then Smittler quietly reached into his cloak and pulled out something wrapped carefully in paper. A chocolate bar. Not ordinary chocolate either. This was rare, imported chocolate that was incredibly difficult to find anywhere in Teginia. Luxuries like that rarely reached a hardened war town like Wallington. Philip raised an eyebrow in surprise. Smittler grinned proudly while slipping it into Philip's hand discreetly. It was his own strange little way of thanking Philip for constantly defending the town. For all Philip's toughness and discipline, even he appreciated good chocolate. "I'll catch you later," Philip said, while already opening part of the wrapper with a small grin. The mayor nodded before the two finally parted ways. Philip continued walking back toward his home while quietly eating pieces of the rare chocolate bar. But the moment he arrived near his house, he immediately noticed something unusual. His mailbox was overflowing with letters. Philip frowned slightly and began sorting through the pile. Most mail arriving from outside towns usually meant problems, taxes, complaints, reports of conflict, occasionally even court summons from Iredale itself. Then he noticed one envelope that instantly caught his attention. The seal of Iredale. Philip's expression hardened immediately. Only bad things usually came from Gregory's kingdom. Carefully, Philip opened the letter, expecting trouble. But instead of a fine or accusation, he discovered something completely unexpected. An invitation. King Gregory himself was inviting Philip to compete in the Iredale tournament. Philip stared silently at the letter for several moments. This made little sense to him. At first, Gregory and Wallington were far from friends. Wallington openly distrusted Iredale and constantly resisted Gregory's growing influence across Teginia. Yet the letter clearly explained Gregory's promise. The tournament was open to all of Teginia, allies, rivals, even enemies. Every fighter would supposedly be treated fairly, if Gregory's word could truly be trusted. Philip shook his head slowly while continuing to read through the details. That was when his attention locked onto the reward. Gold, a massive amount of it, and land. Philip's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Wallington could use both desperately. More territory meant greater strength. More gold meant stronger defenses, more supplies, more soldiers, and greater independence from outside kingdoms. Winning the tournament could change Wallington's future entirely. Even the local mailman who delivered the invitation seemed convinced Philip had a real chance to win. "My money's on him," the mailman bragged confidently to others nearby after seeing the tournament seal arrive for Philip. Philip looked back down at the letter again, realizing something important. The tournament was very close. If he planned to enter, he needed to leave immediately for Iredell before the matches began. Without wasting more time, Philip gathered supplies and packed his bags quickly. His sword rested at his side while he prepared for the long journey ahead. As he stepped outside his home, carrying his belongings, Philip glanced once more toward the distant roads leading out of Wallington. He knew exactly who he needed to speak with before leaving. Mayor Smittler. Philip tightened his grip on the invitation and began walking through town once more, preparing to inform the mayor that Wallington's greatest knight was about to enter Gregory's tournament. Philip moved quickly through the dark streets of Wallington with the tournament invitation folded tightly inside his coat pocket. Though he acted calm on the outside, his mind was racing. Leaving for Iredell was not a small decision. Gregory's kingdom had caused Wallington years of suffering through war, pressure, and bloodshed. Entering Gregory's castle willingly almost felt wrong. Still, the rewards were too important to ignore. Philip eventually arrived at one of Mayor Smittler's hidden safe houses, tucked quietly between several buildings near the edge of town. The mayor often used places like this during dangerous times in case spies or enemies tried locating him. Philip stepped toward the door and knocked firmly several times. Tock, tock, tock. A guard inside cracked the door carefully and stared out suspiciously. "Yes, who knocks?" the guard demanded cautiously. But the moment he recognized Philip's eye patch and uniform, his entire expression relaxed immediately. No further questions were needed. Philip was trusted completely inside Wallington. The guard stepped aside and allowed him inside. Mayor Smittler sat at a wooden table near the fireplace, drinking from a metal mug when Philip entered. The room smelled of smoke, old wood, and fresh stew. Smittler looked up calmly. "What's the good word?" he asked casually. Philip hesitated slightly before sitting down across from him. For once, the fearless knight actually looked a little nervous. He already knew the mayor would hate hearing anything involving Gregory or Iredell. Still, Philip decided honesty was better than hiding it. "I got an invite to fight in the tournament." The room instantly became quieter. Mayor Smittler's expression hardened immediately into a deep frown. He leaned back slowly while shaking his head. King Gregory's name alone irritated him. Wallington had suffered too much because of Iredell over the years. Soldiers died fighting Gregory's wars, lands were damaged, trade routes collapsed. Too many people in Wallington viewed Gregory as a manipulative tyrant, pretending to unite Teginia through fear and gold. Smittler pointed firmly toward Philip. "King Gregory is not to be trusted." Philip expected that response completely. He calmly explained the situation further. The rewards alone could change Wallington forever. Gold, territory, resources. Lexington itself was being offered to the winner. If Philip succeeded, Wallington could grow stronger than ever before. Philip also reassured the mayor he would not blindly trust Gregory's kindness. "I will be extra careful," Philip promised seriously. The mayor remained silent for several moments while staring into the fireplace thoughtfully. Finally, Smittler sighed heavily before nodding. "I trust you." That was all Philip needed to hear. To him, those words were permission enough. Philip stood, shook the mayor's hand firmly, and departed the safe house almost immediately afterward. He tucked the invitation back into his pocket and began the long walk toward Iredale Castle through the surrounding forests. Unlike travellers from distant kingdoms, Philip did not need transportation. Wallington sat fairly close to Iredale compared to many other regions of Teginia. Still, the route itself remained dangerous. The deeper Philip walked into the woods, the more the weather seemed to worsen. Dark clouds blocked most of the sunlight, while cold wind drifted through the trees. The forest felt damp, gloomy, and strangely silent. Philip looked upward, hoping the skies would brighten eventually. "It'll get brighter," he muttered quietly to himself while continuing onward. But the weather only made the woods more dangerous, especially near Iredale. As Philip moved closer toward Gregory's territory, he slowly began sensing movement nearby. Water shifted strangely beside him. Bushes rustled. Small ripples spread across the swamp water surrounding the narrow forest path. Philip instantly recognized the problem. Crocodiles, of course. At this point, nearly every fighter traveling toward Iredale had encountered these monsters somewhere near the castle grounds. Gregory practically allowed the swamps themselves to become part of the tournament challenge. Unlike some warriors, though, Philip did not immediately attack. Instead, he slowed down and carefully studied the creatures. Several crocodiles surrounded him silently from the water while watching his movements closely. Philip moved step by step, testing whether they would attack first. For a brief moment, none of them did. But eventually, one crocodile drifted too close toward his leg. That was enough. Philip's sword flashed instantly. "Smash!" The crocodile shrieked violently as Philip attacked without hesitation. Water exploded around him as more crocodiles lunged from different directions. Philip fought with brutal speed, punching, kicking, and swinging his sword in rapid combinations that sliced through the creatures one after another. The swamp became chaos. Water splashed high into the air while crocodiles snapped wildly around him. Philip's movements were fast and aggressive, but unlike Quan's overwhelming dominance earlier, Philip noticed something dangerous quickly. There were too many of them. The crocodiles kept approaching from different angles endlessly through the swamp. Even after cutting several apart, more continued emerging from the water. Philip realized fighting them forever would waste valuable time and energy before the tournament even began. So, Philip adapted immediately. He began swinging his sword in wide circles, forcing nearby crocodiles backward temporarily. The spinning attacks created just enough space for him to retreat safely through the swamp. Then, Philip ran, not out of fear, but strategy. He already had bigger battles waiting ahead. Eventually, the massive towers of Iredale Castle appeared through the darkening forest as evening settled over the land. Philip slowed down near the edge of the trees and stared toward the front entrance, where guards stood watch near the main gates. Immediately, his instincts warned him against walking directly through the front doors. Wallington and Iredale were enemies after all. Even with Gregory claiming the tournament welcomed all fighters fairly, Philip still did not trust the castle completely. Walking proudly through the front gates felt foolish to him. So instead, Philip decided to sneak inside another way. Night fully settled across the castle grounds, while Philip carefully moved through shadows near the outer walls. He crouched quietly behind stone corners and watched patrols pass by, one after another. Surprisingly, nobody noticed him. Eventually, Philip discovered a smaller side entrance near the rear sections of the castle. a small wooden door, slightly hidden between the stone walls. Philip looked around one final time before slowly pushing it open. Without making a sound, the eye-patched knight slipped quietly into Iredell Castle through the hidden entrance, and judging by the serious look in his eyes, Philip was not entering Gregory's castle simply to relax peacefully before the tournament. Several days before Gregory's grand tournament began in Iredale, another invitation arrived deep within the industrial town of Braden. Unlike the proud military culture of Piskville or the hardened freedom fighters of Wallington, Braden thrived through labor, trade, oil, and raw endurance. Smoke constantly rose into the skies from the oil fields, while giant machines groaned throughout the town, day and night. And standing at the center of Braden's power was Mayor Botti. The old goat leader stood proudly inside his enormous mansion, holding a royal invitation high into the air. His golden robes and horned crown reflected the warm candlelight, while servants quietly moved throughout the halls. Nearby, across the room, sat a large hyena warrior, tearing into a roasted chicken dinner without much care for manners. His name was Muan Farnail. The moment he spotted the invitation in Botti's hand, his ears perked up with curiosity. "Is that for me?" Muan asked, while grinning slightly. Mayor Botti stared at him seriously before pointing directly toward him with the invitation. "You will fight in the tournament." Muan leaned back thoughtfully while chewing another bite of food. Surprisingly, the idea actually interested him immediately. Fighting never scared Muan. In fact, trouble seemed to follow him almost naturally his entire life. He looked back toward the mayor. "What's it for?" Mayor Botti wasted no time explaining. "Golden Land." That instantly caught Muan's full attention. Then Botti's expression hardened further as he stepped closer. "We must win this." The mayor clearly viewed Gregory's tournament as more than entertainment. Winning would bring Braden more influence, wealth, and territory. Botti already held leverage with Gregory because Braden supplied oil to Iredell regularly. Gregory depended heavily on Braden's oil fields to keep parts of his kingdom functioning properly. That dependence protected Braden from some of Gregory's harsher political pressure. Still, Botti wanted more, and he believed Muan might actually be capable of achieving it. Muan accepted the invitation with a confident grin before shaking the mayor's hand firmly. Unlike disciplined commanders like Quan or hardened veterans like Philip, Muan carried a very different energy. He was chaotic, reckless at times, but naturally dangerous. Ever since childhood, he survived through fighting. Growing up among aggressive hyena clans forced him to battle constantly for status, food, and respect. Weakness simply did not survive where Muan came from. That brutal upbringing shaped him into a terrifying fighter. Muan wore heavy green armor, colored after grass and nature itself. To him, green symbolized healing and strength from the earth, while many warriors chose intimidating black or royal gold armor. Muan preferred the color of life itself, and in his hands rested two massive green hammers capable of crushing armor and bones alike. The frightening part was not just his strength, it was his speed. Muan moved incredibly fast for such a heavily armored fighter. Like a true hyena, he darted unpredictably around enemies while striking with brutal force. His kicks and punches alone could stagger warriors twice his size. If both hammers connected cleanly during battle, most opponents would not stand back up afterward. Muan Farnail was absolutely not someone to underestimate. But, strangely enough, he rarely acted like a monster outside combat. Most of the time, Muan simply joked around, wandered into trouble accidentally, or acted like an oversized troublemaker trying to survive another day. Unfortunately for him, bad luck seemed to follow him constantly. When not fighting, Muan spent most of his life working honestly in Braden's oil fields. The endless rows of pipes, drills and machinery stretched across the town like giant metal beasts buried into the earth. Workers respected Muan heavily there because he could fix nearly anything placed in front of him. Broken pipes, damaged pumps, cracked machinery. Muan repaired it all with his own hands. That was why workers nicknamed him the Fixer. Despite his wild personality, Muan understood machinery surprisingly well. He spent long hours tightening pipes, repairing leaks, and ensuring Braden's oil production kept flowing smoothly. Without the oil fields, Braden would lose much of its power and importance across Teginia. Muan worked through the remainder of the day, fixing equipment, while smoke rose heavily into the sky behind him. Workers nearby whispered excitedly about the tournament invitation after hearing the news. Some believed Muan had a real chance to win if he stayed focused. Others worried he might accidentally destroy the arena itself before the finals even started. By sunset, Muan finally finished his duties and returned home briefly to gather supplies, weapons, and the invitation. He strapped both green hammers securely across his back before stepping toward the door confidently. "I'm off to Iredell," he announced proudly. And with that, Muan Farnail departed Braden entirely. The walk toward Iredell was not short, but distance never bothered someone like Muan. Hyenas were built for endurance and movement. The faster he moved through forests and trails, the more comfortable he actually felt. So, with his armor clanking loudly and his hammers hanging behind him, Muan sprinted off toward the forests leading to Gregory's kingdom. Another dangerous fighter was now heading toward the tournament, and Teginia still had no idea how chaotic Gregory's arena was about to become. Muan Farnail moved through the forests toward Iredell with surprising speed for someone wearing such heavy armor. Branches snapped beneath his boots, while the green metal plates around his body clanked loudly with every step. Wolves watched him from distant hills, and bears sniffed through the trees nearby, but none of them dared approach the massive hyena warrior carrying twin hammers. The deeper Muan traveled into the woods, the more excited he became about the tournament. Every step closer to Iredell felt like another step toward gold, land, and glory. Eventually, the trees opened up enough for him to finally spot Iredell Castle in the distance. The giant stone towers rose proudly over the forests, like a kingdom carved directly from the earth itself. Water surrounded much of the castle grounds, creating a dangerous natural defense before the walls even began. Muan grinned confidently and jumped directly into the water without hesitation. But almost immediately, something felt wrong. The water beneath him shifted strangely. Muan lowered himself deeper and spotted movement below the surface. Several pairs of glowing reptilian eyes stared upward from the dark water. Crocodiles, King Gregory's little monsters. Muan slowly rose back above the water and looked around only to notice more crocodiles circling nearby. Some floated quietly, while others crept closer through the water, waiting for an opportunity to strike. "Oh, look what we got here," Muan muttered with a grin. Unlike many travelers, Muan was not nervous at all. If anything, he looked entertained. He absolutely hated crocodiles because they constantly stole fish from the rivers around Braden. To him, these beasts were more annoying than terrifying, and now he finally had an excuse to smash a few of them. The first crocodile lunged from the water, with its jaws open wide. Muan reacted instantly. He swung one hammer downward with unbelievable force, directly into the creature's skull. Water exploded upward as the crocodile crashed sideways violently. Another beast charged from behind, only for Muan to spin and smash it across the face with his second hammer. The sounds echoed throughout the swampy forest. Crack, splash, smash! The crocodiles were thrown around the water helplessly, while Muan laughed like he was enjoying a game. His twin hammers were horrifying weapons up close. Every hit landed with brutal, crushing force that snapped teeth, cracked skulls, and launched the reptiles backward through the water. One crocodile attempted to bite his arm, but Muan punched it directly in the jaw before smashing it again with a hammer strike powerful enough to send the beast diving beneath the surface. Soon, the surviving crocodiles began retreating completely. They disappeared into the deeper water, realizing this hyena warrior was far too dangerous to continue fighting. Muan watched them swim away and laughed proudly. Piece of cake. To him, the entire encounter was actually fun. If someone offered him another chance to fight crocodiles tomorrow, he probably would accept immediately, just for entertainment. After climbing from the water, Muan continued walking directly toward the front entrance of Iredell Castle. Guards stood nearby, holding spears while watching incoming visitors carefully. The moment Muan approached, they immediately noticed the heavy green armor and massive hammers hanging at his sides. Muan held up his invitation proudly. "I need to enter the castle," he said firmly. "I'm here to fight in the tournament, sent by Mayor Botti from Braden." The guard inspected the invitation carefully before nodding respectfully and shaking Muan's hand. Braden was important to Gregory because of the oil trade, so the guards treated Muan with at least some level of respect. Once inside the castle halls, Muan looked around curiously at the stone walls, torches, banners, and armored guards patrolling nearby. The place smelled heavily of smoke, metal, and cooked food. Then Muan asked a simple question. "How much for a room?" The guard smirked slightly before answering. 2 silver coins." Muan's expression immediately darkened. He did not like that answer at all. This annoyed him deeply, because he fought beside Iredell during the previous war. He battled enemy soldiers, crushed rats from Jacques, and defended Gregory's lands more than once. Muan believed that service should have earned him better treatment. "I fought in war with you," Muan growled, hoping the guard might reconsider. But the guard did not care. "Still 2 silver coins." That response irritated Muan badly. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the coins aggressively, and threw them across the floor where they clanked loudly against the stone walls. The guard frowned immediately. "How rude of you." Muan merely rolled his eyes while grabbing his room key. The guard pointed him toward the correct hallway, but refused to escort him any further after that attitude. Clearly, the two were already tired of each other. Muan stomped off toward his room, still muttering complaints under his breath about paying silver after everything he had done for Iredell. Once inside his room, however, his mood slowly improved. He looked around proudly before gripping both hammers tightly. "I'm going to win this fight," he told himself confidently. But after a few moments, the reality of the tournament started settling into his mind. Who exactly was coming to fight? How powerful were they? What tricks or skills would they use? Muan realized strength alone might not guarantee victory. But how? He asked himself quietly, while thinking harder about the battles ahead. He needed to prepare, so instead of resting immediately, Muan dropped to the floor and began doing push-ups repeatedly to keep his body physically charged before tomorrow's fights. Sweat rolled down his face while torchlight flickered across the room walls. Then, suddenly, knock, knock! Muan stood up quickly and opened the door to see another guard standing outside. "You'll get a free meal before the fight," the guard informed him. "King Gregory is feeding all fighters tomorrow morning. You may request your preferred food." Muan actually liked that idea quite a bit. A tyrant, Gregory might be, but at least the man understood fighters needed good meals before battle. Still, Muan remained suspicious after being charged silver for the room. Part of him wondered if Gregory would somehow charge him later for breakfast too. Eventually, exhaustion finally hit him. The long travel, crocodile fighting, and excitement of arriving at Iredell had drained his energy completely. Muan let out a large yawn before dropping heavily onto the bed. "Time for sleep," he muttered. As the torches burned quietly around the castle halls outside, Muan Farnail closed his eyes, dreaming of victory, gold, and becoming one of the strongest champions in all of Teginia. The morning sun slowly rose over Iredell Castle as torchlight faded across the stone hallways. Fighters throughout the castle were beginning to wake up for the biggest day many of them had ever faced. Today was tournament day. Inside one of the castle rooms, Winston Hops finally began waking from his sleep. His alarm clock rang loudly beside the bed, exactly when he wanted it to. Winston had planned this carefully. He did not want to oversleep before a tournament fight. "Yawn." The large rabbit stretched his arms while rubbing his eyes. He actually felt pretty good physically. His body felt rested and energized. But Winston had one very important problem that needed fixing immediately. He was starving. Winston sat up in bed, already thinking about breakfast. Thankfully, King Gregory had promised every fighter a meal before the tournament began, and Winston made absolutely sure his request included double portions. Not long after waking up, he suddenly heard loud knocking at the door. "Knock, knock, knock!" Winston immediately smiled. That's definitely food. He hurried over to the door and opened it to find a castle guard standing there, carrying an enormous plate piled high with steaming meat, vegetables, potatoes, and bread. The smell alone nearly made Winston emotional. "Double portions," the guard announced proudly. Winston's eyes widened with excitement. "Whoa! Thanks, buddy." Even Winston could barely believe this was happening inside King Gregory's castle. Gregory was feared across Teginia as a ruthless tyrant, yet here he was, feeding tournament fighters like honored guests. To Winston, the entire thing felt strange, but wonderful at the same time. He quickly grabbed the food and returned to the table inside his room, where he absolutely destroyed the meal. Chicken, ham, potatoes, carrots, Brussels sprouts. Every bite tasted incredible. Winston chewed loudly and happily while grease dripped from his mouth. He loved every second of it. For a few moments, he completely forgot about fighting, danger, and tournaments. Right now, life was simply about food. After finishing the massive meal, Winston leaned back, proudly feeling completely satisfied. His belly was full, his energy was high, and now it was finally time to see who he would be fighting. Winston stepped outside his room and wandered through the castle halls until he found the tournament bracket hanging on the wall. Fighters and guards had already gathered nearby reading the names. Winston stared carefully at the board. Winston Hops versus Quan. He blinked slowly. Quan. The name meant absolutely nothing to him. Winston had no clue. He was about to face one of Piskville's deadliest warriors. He had no idea Quan wore heavy armor powerful enough to slow other fighters down, or that King Sisos personally believed Quan could win the entire tournament. Winston might have been walking directly into disaster. But Winston did not care much at all right now. The food alone had already made the trip worth it to him. Curious about the castle itself, Winston continued wandering through the stone hallways, looking around at the torches, banners, and narrow corridors. The place felt enormous and mysterious compared to where he normally lived. Then suddenly, something strange caught his attention. A tiny blue bird fluttered through the hallway nearby. "A bird?" Winston muttered, while scratching his head. He stared suspiciously as the little creature flew around the hallway, almost like it was searching for something. The bird swooped close to Winston's face before quickly darting backward again. Winston narrowed his eyes. The bird fluttered around again, teasing him playfully before flying farther down the hallway. "Hey! Get back here!" Winston shouted while pointing after it. But the bird ignored him completely. It flew upward toward the ceiling, where one small vent panel hung open slightly. The tiny creature slipped directly through the opening and disappeared into the darkness above the castle halls. Winston stood there, staring upward in confusion. Now he had questions racing through his mind. Why was a bird flying around inside Iredale Castle? Who did it belong to? And why did it almost seem like the bird was watching him? Winston rubbed the side of his head, still confused, before finally deciding it was probably better not to wander too far around Gregory's castle. Getting caught sneaking around could easily bring trouble. So Winston slowly turned around and headed back toward his room, still thinking about the strange little bird hidden somewhere above the castle ceilings. Morning sunlight poured through the castle windows as Quan slowly woke up inside one of the finest rooms in Iredale Castle. The soft bed sheets covered him, while the warm, medieval room glowed from candlelight and the sunrise outside. His armor rested nearby against the wall, polished and intimidating even while standing still. Yawn. Quan rubbed his eyes while stretching in bed. For once, he actually looked peaceful. King Gregory clearly made sure his honored fighters were treated well before the tournament. The room was warm, quiet, and comfortable. The bed felt perfect, and the cool morning air flowing through the stone windows made it even better. Quan had slept deeply without a single interruption. He sat up slowly, already feeling energized. Today was fight day. Immediately, Quan's serious mindset returned. He wasted no time preparing himself. He quickly dressed in his dark purple armor, piece by piece, before wrapping the mask back around his face. The moment the mask covered him again, Quan no longer looked relaxed. He looked dangerous, like a warrior ready for battle. Quan planned on leaving the room to find food before the tournament began. But suddenly, knock, knock, knock. Quan stopped and turned toward the door cautiously. He opened it to find one of King Gregory's guards standing outside the room. "We got food in the dining room," the guard informed him. Quan nodded quietly. He already expected Gregory to prepare something large for the fighters. Gregory understood warriors well. Hungry fighters fought poorly. Fed fighters fought like beasts. The guard explained that the dining hall was reserved mainly for honored soldiers and tournament participants. The best food in the castle was waiting there. Quan smirked slightly beneath the mask before heading down the torch-lit hallways toward the dining room. His cape dragged behind him while his armor echoed through the stone corridors. As soon as he entered the room, Quan immediately saw enormous tables filled with food from one end to the other: roasted meats, potatoes, bread, fruits, soups, and expensive drinks covered nearly every inch of the hall. Fires burned warmly along the walls while servants moved around preparing even more plates. It looked less like breakfast and more like a celebration feast before war. Exactly what Quan wanted. A good meal meant strength. Strength meant victory. Quan slowly looked across the dining hall while thinking about the fight ahead. He already knew who his first opponent was because King Gregory informed him personally the night before. Winston Hops, an overweight rabbit boxer. Quan knew Winston specialized in boxing and hand-to-hand fighting, but Quan was not intimidated by that at all. He had fought countless warriors throughout Teginia already: knights, tunnel fighters, rats, blobs, crocodiles. None of it frightened him anymore. Still, Quan never underestimated opponents. That was how fighters died. So, while he believed he would win, he intended to stay fully prepared. Every movement, every strike, every decision in the arena mattered. Quan grabbed a plate and stared across the feast with calm confidence. Today, the tournament finally begins, and Quan planned on proving exactly why King Seisos called him the Chosen One.
Winning this tournament is my destiny. Winston Hops is nothing but a rabbit from a farm. I am Quan, an elite knight forged in countless wars and battles across Teginia. I've watched kingdoms burn, armies fall, and warriors beg for mercy before my blade. King Gregory and King Chaisos gave me the courage and strength to rise above every fighter here. Their faith made me stronger than steel itself. I didn't come to this tournament for glory alone. I came for the gold and to become the next ruler of Lexington. No rabbit is going to stop me. Nobody in this castle can stop me. I am the greatest fighter in this tournament, and soon the entire world of Teginia will know my name.
Philip spent the entire night wandering the halls of Iredell Castle while the other fighters and guests slept peacefully in their rooms. Every sound in the hallway made him tense. He had snuck into the castle through the back entrance, avoiding guards under the cover of darkness. But now he had nowhere comfortable to stay. At times he laid down in dark stone corners of the castle floor just to close his eyes for a few minutes. Cold walls and hard ground were all he had. As the hours dragged on, Philip started wondering if sneaking inside had been a terrible mistake. If anyone discovered him, King Gregory's dungeon was a real possibility. Morning finally arrived, and Philip tried to act natural while walking through the castle corridors. Hunger and exhaustion led him into one of the dining rooms where soldiers and guards were eating. The room immediately went quiet as several men stared at the stranger in the red uniform. One guard narrowed his eyes and asked, "How do you get in here?" Philip realized instantly they knew something was wrong. There was no use lying anymore. Calmly, he admitted, "I entered from the back, but there were no guards." The confession caught the soldiers off guard. Another soldier, sitting at the table, leaned forward with interest and asked, "You a fighter?" The men quickly understood that Philip must have come for the tournament. Nobody in their right mind would sneak into Iredell Castle, especially someone from Wallington, an enemy city, unless they truly believed they had a chance to fight. Philip kept his tone respectful and answered that he was only there to compete win and leave peacefully. Surprisingly, the soldiers respected his honesty and confidence. For a moment, the tension faded, and they allowed him to walk away unharmed. Philip left the dining hall and continued down the castle hallway, believing the danger had passed. But suddenly a guard stepped out behind him and grabbed him by the shoulder. "You should be charged with trespassing," the guard growled. One of the soldiers from the dining room must have reported him after all. Philip's attempt to blend in had failed. As the guard marched him through the corridors, he demanded, "What's your name?" Philip answered honestly once again, "My name is Philip, from Wallington." Philip tried to calm the situation before it became worse. "I'll fight the tournament and leave," he told the soldiers, hoping they would understand he wasn't there to start trouble. But the guards continued dragging him toward King Gregory's chamber. When Philip entered the room, he found himself surrounded by armored soldiers from Iredell. Many of them recognized him immediately. These were men he had fought against during the war. Philip stood in the middle of the room, staring directly at them without fear. A smirk crossed his face as he reminded them, "I stood tall when you ambushed me." The soldiers remembered exactly who he was, a knight from Wallington who had survived brutal battles against overwhelming odds. Even while surrounded, Philip refused to look weak. He glanced around the chamber and quietly said, "I'll live another day." The soldiers exchanged looks among themselves. Part of them was angry he had trespassed, but another part respected the sheer courage it took to sneak into enemy territory, survive the entire night inside the castle, and casually walk its halls by morning. It was reckless, dangerous, and unbelievably bold. All eyes turned toward King Gregory. The king smiled beneath his golden armor, amused by Philip's nerve. "Let him fight, lose, and leave," Gregory declared. The king clearly did not believe a knight from Wallington could win the tournament, but even he respected the bravery behind Philip's actions. Still, Gregory needed to appear strong before his soldiers. Pointing directly at Philip, he warned him harshly, "You could be in my dungeon." Philip immediately understood the seriousness behind the words. Gregory was not joking. One wrong move, and the king would gladly throw him into a prison cell forever. Philip lowered his pride and answered respectfully, "Yes, King." King Gregory then turned toward the soldiers and delivered a final lesson. Bravery is a slippery slope. He explained that courage could make a man legendary, but it could also destroy him if he pushed too far. Gregory was allowing Philip to stay for now, but only because he admired the risk he had taken. Philip would live another day, and now he would fight in the tournament. Morning sunlight barely slipped through the small stone window of Moine Farnail's room inside Iredell Castle. Unlike many of the nervous fighters staying there, Moine had actually slept well. The massive warrior stretched his arms and legs from the bed, cracking his neck as he slowly woke up. For a few quiet moments, he sat there thinking about the battle ahead. Something about Iredell Castle felt strange to him. The halls were too quiet, the guards too watchful, and the atmosphere carried a heavy feeling he didn't trust. Moine believed places could hold energy, and this castle carried the scent of greed, war, and danger. Still, a fight was coming, and Moine cared more about preparation than fear. He began putting on his heavy armor piece by piece when suddenly the smell of food drifted through the room. Before the guard even opened the door, Moine already knew breakfast had arrived. The scent alone was enough to fully wake him. A castle guard stepped inside, carrying a large tray loaded with chicken, potatoes, bread, and hot coffee, exactly the way Muan requested it. The fighter grinned immediately. He needed a strong meal and plenty of caffeine before stepping into the tournament arena. But then Muan noticed something else sitting beside the tray. Red wine. He almost laughed seeing it. Muan had requested wine mostly as a joke, never expecting King Gregory's castle to actually provide it. Yet, there it was, delivered without hesitation. That surprised him more than anything. Gregory was treating tournament fighters far better than expected. Maybe the king truly wanted this tournament to feel grand and legendary. Or maybe Gregory simply enjoyed showing off his wealth. Either way, Muan wasn't complaining. He tore into the meal aggressively, devouring the chicken and potatoes while washing it down with coffee and wine. By the time he finished, nothing remained on the table except crumbs and empty cups. Muan leaned back in satisfaction. Whatever happened in the Colosseum later, he would not enter it hungry. After eating, Muan decided to head outside toward the Colosseum grounds. No guard had informed him who his opponent would be yet, and he wanted to see the matchup board for himself. The morning air outside the castle felt colder than expected as he walked the dusty road near the arena walls. Fighters, soldiers, and travelers wandered nearby, while workers prepared the Colosseum for the upcoming matches. Finally, Muan stopped in front of a large tournament sign. His eyes scanned the names until he found his own. Muan versus Philip. The moment he read the second name, his expression darkened. Philip was from Wallington. That changed everything. Braden and Wallington had fought each other in countless battles during the war. Blood had already been spilled between their people many times. Muan fought on the side of Braden, loyal to King Gregory and Aridel's allies, while Wallington stood among Gregory's enemies. This would not feel like a normal tournament match. To Muan, this was unfinished business from the battlefield. "I get to fight my sworn enemy?" Muan muttered with excitement. Instead of fear, the matchup filled him with adrenaline. He remembered past battles against armored knights and how many he had already defeated before. Wallington knights were dangerous, but Muan had survived worse. He stared toward the Colosseum with growing confidence and growled, "I've beaten a knight before." And he meant it. Muan Farnail was not entering this tournament as some frightened rookie fighter. He was a hardened warrior shaped by war, bloodshed, and survival. Facing Philip only made him more eager for battle. Suddenly, Muan raised his weapon and shouted toward the arena, "Let's go!" People nearby turned to stare at him, but Muan didn't care. He shouted it again and again, letting everyone around know he was ready to fight immediately if he had to. The tournament had barely begun, and already the tension between Braden and Wallington was boiling back to the surface. But while Muan celebrated his upcoming fight, something strange caught his attention near the woods outside the castle walls. While taking a walk around the area later that day, Muan noticed movement inside the bushes. Hidden behind the leaves was a disturbing creature named Silas. The thing barely looked human anymore. Its dark face stared blankly while long arms reached through the bushes, holding a knife. Muan stayed silent and watched carefully from a distance. Silas slowly handed the blade to another man standing nearby and whispered, "Don't screw this up." The words instantly put Muan on edge. Something suspicious was happening near the tournament grounds, and whoever Silas was working with clearly had dangerous intentions. Muan stayed hidden behind the trees, observing the entire exchange without making a sound. The fighter tightened his grip on his weapon as the tension in the air grew heavier. Iredell Castle was beginning to feel even darker than before. Far away, from the chaos surrounding Taginia and the tournament at Iredell Castle, a brutal blizzard swept across the frozen lands near Deathfalls. Snow crashed sideways through the air, covering the roads and burying the forests of Arcta beneath thick layers of ice. Visibility was nearly gone. The freezing wind felt sharp enough to cut through armor itself. Through the storm walked Strike. Every step looked painful. Snow collected on his shoulders and gloves, while exhaustion covered his face. Strike had traveled far, trying to escape everything behind him. The wars, the betrayals, the tunnels, the fighting in Taginia. It all followed him like ghosts in the storm. He no longer looked like a proud soldier. He looked like a man running from his past. In the middle of nowhere, Strike finally spotted something through the blizzard. A cabin. A small wooden shelter stood isolated near the frozen wilderness outside Arcta. Smoke barely drifted from the chimney while snow piled against the walls. Strike pushed himself toward it, knowing this might be his only chance to survive the night. His boots crunched through the ice as he approached the door. Then he knocked. The sound echoed against the cabin while the storm roared behind him. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. Then the door slowly creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a hardened older man, dressed in green camouflage gear with a gold cross hanging around his neck. His sharp eyes immediately studied Strike from head to toe. The stranger could instantly tell this was no normal traveler wandering through a blizzard. Strike looked battered, exhausted, and desperate. The man narrowed his eyes and asked firmly, "Who are you?" Strike didn't hesitate. He gave his name and explained that he was traveling away from Taginia, but became trapped in Arcta because of the storm. His voice carried exhaustion more than fear. Every word sounded like it came from someone who had been surviving for far too long without rest. The older man listened carefully. His name was Jeffrey. Jeffrey had seen enough hardship in life to recognize broken people when they stood in front of him. Strike's face carried the look of a man trying to disappear from something terrible. His eyes looked tired, distant, and hunted. Jeffrey didn't fully understand what Strike had escaped from yet, but he could tell one thing immediately. This man needed help. The storm outside continued raging while Jeffrey silently made his decision. Finally, he stepped aside from the doorway and motioned toward the warm cabin interior. "Get inside before you freeze to death." Strike gave a quiet nod and entered the cabin, leaving the deadly snowstorm behind him. For now.